Good afternoon. My name is Anna Palmer. I'm editorial director of the Women Rule platform and host of the Women Rule podcast. Glad to be back to host a Women Rule conversation. Today, I'm joined by actress, producer, and director Kerry Washington to discuss The Fight, a documentary that Washington produced chronicling 4 cases the ACLU brought against President Donald Trump's administration. Joining her will be Dale Ho, director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project, and Bridget Amiri, a deputy director at the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Project. Both were featured in the film. As always, we want to get our Women Rule community involved in the conversation. I'll be sure to get to some audience questions throughout the conversation. And if you find parts of the conversation interesting or newsworthy, please do tweet using the hashtag #RuleWithUs. With that, let's get started. Kerry, I want to start with you. You are a producer on the movie. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the idea behind The Fight?
Sure. It was just a wonderful opportunity of a bunch of people having the same idea at the same time. Elise, one of the filmmakers, Leigh Steinberg, she was actually in Brooklyn 7 days into the Trump administration when he enacted his Muslim ban, and the ACLU came in and put a stop to that. And I was watching from home in Los Angeles, and we both had the thought of like, okay, who is going to be on the ground following these extraordinary human beings, these superheroes for civil rights and civil liberties? Who's going to be following them around? Because you know they're going to be at the front lines of all of the important battles that we are facing over the next 4 years. And so we both started to kind of do the busy work of figuring out how to make that film, and realized that we had the same idea and decided to work together.
I think one of the most unique things about the documentary, considering it's Washington, where and New York, but really kind of the politics of it all, is really the sausage that's being made, and you rarely get behind the scenes. I've made a business of my career getting into rooms that nobody else can get into, and you guys certainly did that with this movie. Dale, can you talk about the ACLU's decision to kind of open up the doors to litigation, to behind the scenes, kind of how people were dealing with these very stressful times?
Yeah, so I'll first confess that the decision to allow the filmmakers to come in was made above my pay grade, but I know it was not an uncomplicated one. There were a lot of conversations internally about whether or not it would be a good idea, whether or not we could do it and preserve client confidentiality. And what I'll say, just in terms of my own experience, and I think the other lawyers had something similar, is that the filmmakers were so respectful of our needs as lawyers to preserve client confidence. Were never difficult to work with whenever we needed to kick them out of the room to have a confidential conversation. And we're also just really pleasant to be around and non-intrusive. And after time, trust really developed. We spent a lot of time together, and I started to feel really, really comfortable around them. And I think that's reflected in the level of access in the film and the degree of comfort you see amongst the attorneys letting down their guard.
Yeah, Bridget, I want to kind of ask you too, because you were dealing with the reproductive rights case, obviously very sensitive material, as were all of the cases. But you also let the camera in behind the scenes. There's some shots of your family, of kind of train wine, which is a classic for anybody who a lot of our viewers on the Acela corridor. But how did you make that decision? Were there things where you were worried about maybe coming across differently than you would want to be portrayed?
I was certainly concerned about it, but honestly, my biggest concern was ensuring the right boundaries for the interview with my client, Jane Doe. We really needed to protect her anonymity. Her identity could not be revealed. And so that was my biggest concern, and really kind of putting some boundaries in place in terms of what that interview would look like. I am so grateful that Jane agreed to be interviewed for the film, and her voice is so important and powerful to be included, and she is my personal hero. But that is what made give me the most pause in some ways, is because I really, really needed to protect her identity.
Kerry, as Dale kind of pointed out, you guys spent a lot of time with the lawyers at the ACLU. I read somewhere today, I think 400 hours of footage was shot. There was 173 cases. Can you talk a little bit about the decisions that you and the filmmakers and the people putting this together decided, what was going to be the through line? Because I assume there was plenty of different cases that you could have chosen. How did you pick these kind of specific areas?
It's interesting. I mean, that's the magic of documentary filmmaking, right? Is you just have to jump in and follow story. And Eli was sharing in a panel we actually all did a few hours ago that we're now starting to cut together some of the cases that didn't turn out to be sort of meaty enough or long enough to be part of the film, but that are exquisite in their own right. So we have some great extras that we can include. So, dealing with this amount of storytelling, this level of narrative was really tricky. And it required a great deal of, dare I say, faith, right? To sort of watch the stories as they're unfolding and be cutting them together and just trust that the story will emerge, that it will appear, but I think what Eli managed to do in the editing is breathtaking, really, because they somehow accomplished the same kind of granular intimacy that you get in Wiener, but to do that across 5 lawyers and their clients, and you still feel like you are in deep relationship with each of these stories.
Yeah, so you're referencing the film that the filmmaker made about Anthony Weiner, obviously very familiar to our audience here in Washington. But I think, he was such kind of an outsized figure, certainly in terms of kind of a character into himself. One of the things I thought was pretty interesting in watching the film was, you were able to make drama happen. A lot of the filming takes place at the offices of the ACLU, kind of not necessarily the most dramatic backdrop. Were you concerned at all about keeping viewers' attention?
Once we started following the lawyers, no. Because you could see really quickly, that these are very special people who get drawn to this work. And they were proving to be fantastic characters in their own right. But yes, in the beginning, I guess you bet on the idea, to go back to my original sort of statement of, we knew that this was going to be the front line of the greatest battles around civil rights and civil liberties. And so you trust that in war there is drama. And that's it. These guys are at war. They are really in the trenches. And so to be embedded with them gave you all the drama that all your favorite war movies gives you, a lot of humor, a lot of excitement, a great deal of passion, courage, leadership.
I don't know. I'll say there that when the filmmakers started shooting us, like I sort of, asked a few times, like, are you sure you really want to do this? Because I'm going to just sit here and type for the next 4 hours. Right? So, right. Or I'm going to pick up some binders and walk to another room. Or, all I'm doing today is getting in a cab and getting on a flight to Kansas. And I'll be reading some papers in the cab and on the plane. Right. So, it was news to me anyway, that it could, our lives could make for some interesting viewing.
Well, so how many times did we send a crew with you thinking that there was going to be a decision on the census?
Oh, wow. Well, once you get to June, the Supreme Court could announce an opinion in a big case any day. And they have a lot of days on which they're announcing opinions. So the crew was with me every morning because obviously they didn't want to miss the moment when I was, reading the opinion. And in fact, I was in outside of Los Angeles for half of 1 week, and they flew out because there was one morning when the Supreme Court was going to be announcing opinions just to be there. So, we spent a lot of time together, I guess.
No, it's funny to think, but we just obviously, as you all know, we just finished the last term, and all the decisions came out last week. So we've been kind of waiting with bated breath, certainly for us in the news business about what was going to happen. But I actually thought, Dale, what you did, the census case, and it was kind of one of the most dramatic moments in an office I've ever seen, where you think you've lost and then you haven't lost and you're trying to figure it all out. Was it as dramatic? Was it as dramatic in real life as it appeared to be on the film?
What you see in the film is what happened and what we thought. When I first started reading the opinion, my first thought was we must have lost, because I saw that the 4 liberals had lined up to dissent in part in the case. And when you read the Chief Justice Roberts' lead opinion, it starts by explaining how there's nothing wrong, basically, with adding a citizenship question to the census. And then when I kind of like, went through the crazy emotions of that day, at the end of it, I started reflecting on what had been filmed, and I was sort of mortified for a moment that, like, they captured me like totally misunderstanding the opinion in the first few minutes of reading it. But I felt better when, I remembered that David Cole, the legal director of the ACLU, who's one of the most brilliant legal minds of his generation, thought the same thing when he was reading the opinion. And so that made me feel a little bit better about myself.
I love it. Well, so the documentary follows 4 cases: the immigration ban and family separation, reproductive rights, the transgender ban, and the census. Bridget, you were the lawyer on the reproductive rights case, and I think one of the things the film did really well was show just kind of how much pressure and the weight of the world, frankly, that you felt based on this, kind of representing and taking on this historic case. Can you talk about that in terms of this case and maybe more broadly as you think about women and Roe versus Wade and what's happening now?
Sure. I think it is just so terrifying to think of the government taking away a fundamental decision from another human being about whether and when to become a parent. And so we bring a lot of these, impact cases where we're representing clinics challenging abortion restrictions. And if we lose, often the clinics will have to close their doors, and it's devastating, for the clinic and their patients. And then the Jane Doe case added the additional layer of I'm representing the individual young woman who needs abortion, and the clock is ticking. She first requested an abortion when she was 9 weeks pregnant, and because of the government's obstruction and our, sometimes loss in the battle in the court, based on an opinion written by then Judge Kavanaugh, that she got pushed further into her pregnancy. And it wasn't until she was 15 weeks pregnant that we secured a final victory for her, and she was able to get the abortion. And that, would keep me up at night, even if I wasn't writing a brief in the middle of the night, which I was often doing in that period of time. But that feeling of someone's fundamental rights are in your hands.
Right. Well, we have some audience questions, the people that submitted questions to us already. But before we do, Kerry, I want to ask the question you've probably been asked, and we'll maybe roll your eyes out a little bit, but you played a fixer in Washington on the TV show Scandal. You've played real-life attorney Anita Hill in the movies. What's the biggest difference you've seen kind of between the fictionalized version of some of these things and issues versus kind of the real-life drama that you guys were able to capture?
I've said this before, but what's so magical about documentary filmmaking is that it's capturing the truth. It's capturing reality. And on our best days as actors, what we are reaching for in our wildest dreams is an approximation of that truth. We're reaching for the ability for you to be able to watch us and think, even just for a split moment, that you're watching reality. So I think it's so powerful to work in a documentary medium, because you do get to be reminded of what truth looks like and feels like, and to honor the narratives that are unfolding around us in real life all the time. I mean, I think I love the moment where Dale gets the decision. One of the other moments I love in the film, which is not even a moment that we filmed, right? It's found footage, is Bridget in her deposition. It's like, as a mom, I want to show that to both of my girls, to say, like, look at this extraordinary example of the power of a woman's intellect and her ability to eviscerate that man with such elegance and grace and really academic proficiency. It's a gorgeous moment of what it takes to do the work that they're doing. And I would argue that that's what I was reaching for every season on Scandal, was to have a little bit of what Bridget does every day, to be able to hold on to that and present it as reality.
When you think about that in that context of kind of the overall film, what's your overall hope that comes from putting, a film like this out into the world?
Yeah, I keep joking with these guys that like they are so much braver than I would ever be, and not because they argue cases in front of the Supreme Court, but because they let cameras into their houses to film them with their spouses and their kids, which is something I do not do. Like I don't even put my kids on Instagram. And what they've done by doing that is really help us see that while they are the real life Avengers, while they are truly the heroes at the front lines of protecting all of our rights and hoping to get those first 3 words of our Constitution to really mean we, all of us, the people, they're also just regular people, they're husbands and wives and moms and dads and brothers and sisters, and they are they have figured out how to use their unique talents to impact the world in positive ways. And I think my hope with the film is that all of us get inspired to do the same thing. Not that we all become lawyers for the ACLU, but that we all realize that we have the power to be a force for good within our own communities using our own unique talents. Even if it's baking cookies to raise money for the ACLU, right? Like whatever it is that you can offer up to be part of this fight, like the fight belongs to all of us. Dale talks about that at the end of the film, that these guys are doing the work, but they can't do it alone. So, inspiring people to fill out their census, because look at how hard Dale worked to make that census look like what it's supposed to look like. So fill out your damn census and show up and vote. And if you're feeling overwhelmed because we're being attacked on all of these fronts every day, then contribute to the ACLU, because they're fighting all of those battles on all of those fronts. And maybe also I think I have a little bit of a dream and hope that a lot of young people will see the film and reorient their goals about what heroes look like and choose a path with the ACLU as part of their goal in life.
We are quickly coming to a close here, but before we do, I want to get to at least 1 or 2 audience questions. And the first one is both for Bridget and Dale, which is kind of a little bit of crystal balling here, but our audience is very focused on what's happening in Washington, what happens with this election. And the question is, if Trump is elected to a 2nd term, what do you think the next big court case will be?
I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, there are so many already percolating in the court system already, just on reproductive rights alone. We have, over 30 cases pending in federal courts. And so any of those cases, I think, are fair game to reach the court. And such a small fraction ever do get to the Supreme Court. I think it's super hard to predict. Maybe Dale will do a better job of that than I would, but...
Well, I don't like to predict, but the employment discrimination case was so huge last month, finding that people who are LGBTQ have a right to be free from employment discrimination. But at the same time, it seems like there's a movement in conservative legal circles to push for essentially a right to discriminate under the guise of freedom of religion. And that case that the court decided didn't address that particular issue, and I would expect that to get to the court at some point.
All right, well, Kerry, we will end with you. There's a lot of fascination. We got several questions about what you are doing in regards to the election, in terms of kind of civil justice issues right now. Can you talk a little bit about what your plans are between now and Election Day?
Oh, man. I'm working on a lot of different fronts with a lot of different organizations, working mostly on voting rights and on trying to protect the right to vote state by state, working with a lot of grassroots organizations to get the word out about all of the moving targets around where, when, and how. So that's where a lot of my work is right now.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I know our Women Rule audience will get a lot out of this conversation. So thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we are all out of time. Kerry, Dale, and Bridget, thanks so much for taking the time this afternoon to talk to us about your new documentary, The Fight. I recommend everyone take a moment to watch it. It's very worthwhile. And thanks to our audience for tuning in this afternoon. If you don't already get the weekly Women Rule newsletter, you can text WOMEN to 66866 to sign up for it. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @APalmerDC. We'll be back next month with more virtual programming. So stay healthy and stay tuned.